All right, hello. Jono here again, just checking in. Now, the last time I spoke to everyone, I was on top of the hill in Meursault, just by Les Tessons, drinking a 2018 Domaine Boisson Charles Meursault Premier Cru Liqueur, which was beautiful. I had a couple of voices up there and then headed home and cooked some turbo. So a little bit has happened since then, but what I thought I'd do is I'll just talk through some notes on some of the producers that we bring in, and a couple of the ones that we've picked up, and just little differences between the vintage and also styles and that sort of thing. So I suppose we'll start with Domaine Michel Niellon. So Niellon from Chassagne-Montrachet, no doubt about it, one of our fantastic producers, incredibly famous, very, very sought after, and we're very lucky to have them. Now, we offered the 2018s earlier in the year. Now, 18 as a whole, now this isn't Niellon, but as a general rule, it was very warm vintage. And what happened was, if the producers weren't on it, or switched on, or able to retain freshness through winemaking or in the vineyard, through careful viticultural management, the wines were flabby. Now, with the producers which are able to just really, shade the fruit, keep a good amount of canopy, and canopy management is fairly critical when it's warm. We're able to pick fruit that was still fresh and mineral. Now, the Niellon 18s were amazingly similar to their 17s, and 17 was an amazing white wine vintage in Burgundy. Now, the difference between 18s and 19s as a whole is they were both very warm, but 19, much lower yield, and across the board, 19s seem to have acidity as well, and also tension. Now, that's true for most cases, of course. The only rule is the exception. Some producers, again, miss the mark, probably through vineyard management. So they've adapted very quickly. You've got to remember it's a very important region with a lot of resources, a lot of very clever vignerons, consultants. They're hot on it. They're not, they're not the farmers of yesteryear. They can really adapt. So the 19 Niellons were absolutely beautiful. The Bourgogne Blanc had a sort of a slight wood frame, as you'd expect from the lesser, when they use the exact same oak regime, through to the Chevalier Montrachet, but they're all amazing, particularly the 2019 Chassagne-Montrachet Blanc. Now, usually the Chassagne Blanc is a little bit bigger and richer, but the Chassagne Blanc was particularly nice. Now, I'll just quickly read the note, just as an example. A finer nose, as if I can read it, something's dripped on there, a little bit of wine. So a finer nose with rock salt and pith shining through, a smoky gunflint nuance, charred limes, bath salt, fine, salty, pithy, dry extract, very driven, very fine, very long. One of the finest fillage of the trip. So I go through and just clean these notes up later. I can barely read them myself, but it was looking particularly good. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, the 2019 Chevalier Montrachet was incredibly closed. Almost nothing. But the thing is, as you climb up through the ladder of these wines, they become more and more closed, and the true beauty doesn't come out for sort of 10 or so years. Now, there's lots and lots of visits in between here, but I don't want to mention all of them, because some we're still negotiating, and others were just visiting out of interest. Now, one particular producer, Domaine Michel Gros, so Von Romani, part of the Gros family. So there's Anne Gros, Anne-Françoise Gros, etc., etc. Now, based in Von Romani, but also has vines in the Haute Côte, Denouille, which is just behind Von Romani. Now, I'd read a lot about these guys on the internet. Quite a famous domain, never brought into Australia. Now, one thing that I had heard is there was a sort of, many reviewers reviewed sort of a bit of reduction, sort of bacon fat. Now, the problem with reviewing wine and just trying it out of a barrel, which a lot of them do, is the wine isn't finished yet, and they usually don't mind a bit of reduction through through élevage. they don't love it, but they deal with it before it's time to bottle. Now, what I picked up from Michel Gros style is they're incredibly fresh, lovely tension, very, very fine. There are a couple, on first whiff, did have a little bit of sort of bacon fat reduction, but they opened them up beautifully. In particular, a 2016 Chambord Musigny, after the tasting, before committing to ordering, wines from a producer, you need to sit through a bottle. And there's that bacon fat again, but it blew off within sort of 2 to 3 minutes and left this amazing wine. And it was honestly delicious. That's almost all gone, and that was in a night. And I never finish one bottle of wine in a night. I usually, sort of jump between wines and have a good look. But that was particularly delicious. And I could see what some people were saying about the bacon fat, but it blew off and it was amazing. For instance, I'll give an example of how rare these wines are. We're getting 12 bottles of that Chambord Musigny. That's just the Village, we're getting 12. The highest volume wine we're getting is 60 bottles of their Vin Romani Premier Cru Clos de Riard. And that's because they've got 2.12 hectare of it. So, 60 bottles, very special vineyard, right in amongst the, the Grand Crus of Vin Romani. So very, very special. Now, there's another producer that we've picked up, but I can't talk about them just yet, but they are one of the great domains of Burgundy. Very, very, very exciting. But we'll touch on that on a later date when they're locked in and we've paid for our first order, because I don't want to jinx it. Now, Domaine Pierre Amiot, which is a French Wine Centre favourite, tried their 18s. So I've touched once before on what's happening at Pierre Amiot. So Leon, one of the sons, so Didier and Jean-Louis separating. Jean-Louis wants to retire, Leon will come in. Leon wants to work a little bit more sort of organically and sort of, really push that sort of end of the spectrum. So they've divided the winery into two and built on a little bit. So they've actually split the domains. So 2020 will be the first vintage where there's two separate domains. We'll bring in both. Didier Amiot will have the classic same label and the same style as before. And then we'll see what Leon does. So it'll be Didier Amiot, and Amiot FV, which will be Leon. Now, the 18s were looking very good, particularly the Bourgogne Rouge, but this is the 19, sorry. So what we decided to do was bring in the 2018 just prior, and what that does is it means that whenever we bring in a vintage of the Village and Premier Cru and Grand Crus, we bring in the fresh vintage of Bourgogne Rouge. We just had a gap. We were out of really well-priced Pinot Noir in the warehouse, so we had to jump the gun there a little bit. But looking very good, particularly the Rouchot and the Gevrey-Chambertin Aucambat. They have deeper, older vines and seem to weather the heat a little bit better. They have more brightness, which is funny because they're both sort of usually, well, the Combat particularly is more brooding. Now, Domaine Bourg-Saint-Charles, we talked on just before. The 19s are particularly good. Now, I tasted the 18s, which we're about to release the pre-arrival for in November last year out of tank. Now, they've just been sulphured. The wines were still very good, but they weren't displaying as clearly. But he's already sold out of them. So I missed out on trying them from the bottle. However, I did explain that, I would love to just grab a bottle and just drink it just to understand the vintage and see the evolution. So he gave me a bottle of 2018 Lacroix, which is what I was drinking up on the hill, and the wines were looking fantastic. When I first opened them, they were looking very large-scaled and not necessarily as defined as they usually are, but with a little bit of coaxing in the glass, they really opened up and became really quite special. And it's in the glass just got more and more defined and driven, which is fantastic. Couldn't be happier. And the 19s were really something else. Like 18s, good amount of body, but still but focused. and a lot more tension. So definitely something to look forward to. Can't talk about these guys just yet, but we will. Went and saw Faverley, which are a big domain based in New St George, which is just interesting, just a good sort of benchmark. It's good to see what's happening out there. Didn't realise, but he invented the bit on a train between the train and the cable up the top. And they're in the top 100 wealthiest families in France. And they just sold a portion of their train part manufacturing business for 1.8 billion euro. So no cash flow issues, I'd imagine. Now, René Cachot, who we bring in from Van Romany, so we'll have 2 Van Romany producers now. 19 Aligoté, looking absolutely fantastic, particularly the Bourgogne Côte d'Or, Chambolle Musigny, Van Romany Le Beaumont, very masculine, but the Souchot was probably the standout, very resolved. A big wine, but still very fine and focused. Now, a lot else has been happening, and I'm looking forward to being able to update people on a couple of other things. So, I'm going to get back in the kitchen, and I'm going to carry on with a bit more work. But until then, sorry about the boring, very serious update, but we'll mix it in with a bit of lightheartedness soon. Okay, cheers. All the best.